There has never been a time in NBA history quite like the bubble, and there probably never will be again. At the time, it seemed like the entire world was scrambling and looking for answers in the wake of a worldwide pandemic, and one that was spreading fast. There were not a lot of answers, but there were a lot of questions. As for the NBA world, on March 11th, 2020, they would shut down their season. This would come after Utah Jazz defensive star Rudy Gobert tested positive for the coronavirus. The pandemic had officially hit the NBA and the league had to shut down. This meant, however, that the season would conclude without an NBA champion. For the 2019-20 season, we were left without a title winner, and the remainder of that season was left in a state of purgatory. A couple of months later, the NBA would restart their season, and games would start on July 30th. This was a decision that was pretty polarizing. On one hand, this was great for fans of the NBA, fans of basketball, in terms of the fact that you got to watch this great sport once again on the biggest stage, in the biggest league in the world, the NBA, of course. It's great for that reason, and we would get a champion finally. But there were some question marks. First of all, was it safe? With Rudy Gobert acquiring COVID just a few months prior, that incident was still kind of fresh in the minds of everyone, especially considering how the NBA would have to shut down afterwards. So now the games, they were going to be in an isolated environment. No fans. It's just the players, the coaches, and the basketball. But even then, are we sacrificing safety in the name of basketball, or can these two things work together? And then the other question mark was more so about the legitimacy of it. Does it really count? Because, as I said a second ago, this is an isolated environment. It's going to be in the NBA bubble. All the games are going to be in Orlando. There's no home court advantage, no fans, and it's just unlike anything we've ever seen before in NBA history. So how much does it really count relative to another championship? Would it be legitimate? And if not, should we really even bother restarting? Those were some of the questions that people had. For the Los Angeles Lakers, however, they didn't have questions. They were looking to answer, to prepare themselves for the NBA bubble and win, bringing a championship back home to Los Angeles. They had their eyes on the prize, and they had a dominant front court duo looking to bring that title home. A couple years earlier, on July 1st, 2018, LeBron James had signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. To call him a superstar would be an understatement. This is a top 2 player in the history of the association. And yes, even when he signed, it felt as though he was in the twilight years of his career. But he was still undeniably a superstar, an MVP candidate, and one of, if not the best player in the world, in spite of his age. Then going to Los Angeles, that's a massive, massive market. One that's going to treat a superstar like him with the biggest spotlight possible. All eyes were on LeBron and what he would do with the Lakers. Just about a year after that, on July 6, 2019, the Lakers would trade for Anthony Davis. They would get LeBron a running mate, and this was a dominant forward duo. On one hand, you had LeBron, arguably still the best in the world, and on the other, you had AD, arguably a top 5 player in the world. That's 2 top 5 players to have on your team. That's a scary sight for any team facing you. And these guys were pretty much at the peak of their powers. So the season prior, in 2018-19, Anthony Davis had averaged 25.9 points a night and 12 rebounds per game. That's already astounding offensive production, among the best in the league, but then you pair that with him being one of the best defenders the association has to offer, and that just takes his game to an entirely different level. He's elite on both ends. That was a massive pickup for the Lakers. Standing alongside AD, of course, you would have LeBron James, who in that same 2018-19 season, the year before the Lakers acquired AD, he had his first year with Los Angeles. And in that year, he was a threat to do everything on the court for them. 27.4 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, and 8.3 assists a night. He was doing everything, and he was doing everything at a high level. As we would come to find out in later years, LeBron would be an example of longevity, the likes of which we have never seen before in the history of the association. And he certainly was not slowing down as soon as he joined the Lakers. Very, very far from it. As talented as the Lakers were at the top with AD and LeBron, they weren't just top-heavy. They had a lot of depth to them as well. This was a really, really good roster all around, and one that in future years, the Lakers would kind of lose that depth. They had AD and LeBron for years after this, but they just didn't have that same quality of rotation that they had this season. They had a lot of depth to them. Outside of that star-studded frontcourt, you also had KCP, an elite role player, Alex Caruso, yet another elite role player, incredible defender, Danny Green, a knockdown shooter, Rajon Rondo, we all know about Rondo. Not many passers better in the history of the league than him. A young Kyle Kuzma, as well as Markieff Morris, Dwight Howard, and JaVale McGee. All of these guys will play 14-plus games come the postseason. So they were all getting out there pretty consistently, and you had a lineup of at least 10 guys that you could really, really trust. As good as that roster is, they've still got to execute. Round 1, they're up against the Portland Trailblazers. Portland takes game 1, but LA responds. They win 4 straight and go on to advance in 5. Round 2, it's a similar story. Houston comes out, they win game 1. But LA, they don't let that phase them, and they win 4 straight. Notably here in this series, they were playing against future Los Angeles Laker Russell Westbrook. And there were moments in this series where Westbrook just kind of shot the Rockets out of games. Overall, it was a good season in Houston for Westbrook, but this postseason series was one that he probably wants to forget, and one that the Lakers were able to beat him in pretty easily. In the conference finals, it's another victory in 5 for the Lakers. This time they were up against the Denver Nuggets. And this is a team that in a few years would not only be championship contenders, they would be NBA champions, led by a generational offensive talent in Nikola Jokic, who's going to go down in NBA history as an all-time great. But this time around, the Lakers had the Nuggets number, and they advanced in 5. And now we arrive to the NBA Finals, the biggest game of them all. And this is the biggest fight that the Lakers have faced up to this point. This series lasts 6 games against the Miami Heat. And going into this one, you have a pretty interesting storyline. Perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is, with the Lakers being captained by LeBron James, he was, of course, with the Miami Heat many, many years ago. That's where he won his first couple of championships. And now he's with a new franchise looking to win against the team that he once called home. But then you get to the modern day, and you've got LeBron, he's paired up with AD, as well as that super talented roster with tons of depth to him. And then on the other hand, you have an upstart Miami Heat team that nobody really expected to get here, but one that is led by a very, very strong and passionate, driven leader in Jimmy Butler, who would put on some incredible performances. There's an iconic photo of him just kind of laying his head down against the bench, tired, spent from all the effort that he's put in. It was a fight, but the Lakers come out in 6, and they are your NBA champions. At the time, this NBA championship ties them with the Boston Celtics for the most in league history. They are once again on top, and the 2020 NBA champions are, of course, your Los Angeles Lakers. At the head of it all is, of course, LeBron James, your 2020 Finals MVP. In that series, he averaged 29.8 points per game, 11.8 rebounds, and 8.5 assists. With this, he would win his 4th NBA championship in his pursuit of becoming the greatest player in NBA history. That is a debate that is still polarizing today, but one that if LeBron did not win this championship and he only had 3, it would be a lot harder to make a case for him. But this performance was incredible, and it reminded everybody why he deserves to be in the conversations for the greatest to ever grace an NBA court. Your Finals MVP, LeBron James. The Lakers had a couple of keys to success throughout this championship run. Of course, they had the dominant front court of AD and LeBron. That by itself is pretty hard to stop. But they were also very well-rounded. You had a lot of key contributors here. Everybody was bought in, and you could tell with the product on the court. And they also had a really, really good defense. You think about Alex Caruso, KCP, Anthony Davis. You got Caruso and KCP on the perimeter, and then you got AD in the post. That is a nightmare for opposing offenses. And that is how the Lakers became champions of the 2020 NBA bubble. But as we were talking about earlier, there were some people, when the bubble started, they were kind of questioning, hey, how much does this really count? Is this championship legitimate for the Lakers? Let's try to answer that. There are 3 primary arguments against the NBA bubble and kind of the legitimacy of the Lakers title. The first was that the midseason break helped LeBron and AD to be playing at their fullest, in that they would not have won a championship without that break. The second is that, of course, there was no home court advantage. And that's just a huge part of the game. So to take that away, no fans in the arena, it's completely different. So how do we gauge that? And lastly, it's just an unfamiliar environment. And so when something's different, it's easy to point at it and say that it might be illegitimate and kind of just call it into question, because you just don't really see something like this, like the NBA bubble. For argument number one, that the break mid-season helped LeBron and AD, this is a valid thing to think, because as we would see in the years following this, whether it was injuries or just LeBron, ultimately not succumbing to Father Time, but slowing down just a little bit, given that they would never repeat the championship success together, it is fair to say that they might have been aided by that break in the season. But also, to raise a counter argument, they were the number one seed before the shutdown. They were already doing very, very well without a break. And so with that, in being the one seed, you're already near the top of the league. You are at the top of the standings. And so kind of the natural through line there is to go on and become NBA champions if you truly are the best. So a break absolutely could have helped, but they were already doing very, very well. Argument two is that there was no home court advantage. There were no fans. And, with that, they didn't have to go out on the road and win a tough game against a rowdy crowd, a loud crowd that could really get in the minds of them and affect the game. You didn't have to see that. And that's valid, because across all of sports, fans are just such a huge, huge aspect of it. Whether it's for just, viewing it and having the atmosphere of so many fans just hooting and hollering, all kinds of cheering. But on the other side of it, in being the one seed, the Lakers would have had the home court advantage more often than not. And so they would have been playing in a crowd, and that could have arguably helped them playing in Los Angeles. So you could argue that having no home court advantage maybe even made it a little bit more difficult for them. And lastly, argument number three, this was an unfamiliar environment. And with that, on one hand, it's so different. How do we gauge that relative to every other season in the history of the NBA? And secondly, how then is it ultimately fair that we crown a champion under such different circumstances when we don't know what would have happened if the season just kind of continued as it was regularly? But as a counter argument, I would say that every team was into the bubble. It was not only unfamiliar for the Lakers, it was unfamiliar for everyone, and the Lakers just kind of managed to capitalize. There were some great runs in there by a team like the Miami Heat that they were driven, they were looking to capitalize as well, but the Lakers ultimately got it done in this unfamiliar environment. And I would argue that almost makes it even more respected in my eyes, because they had to kind of persevere through this bubble, through this changing environment. But I can see the other side too. So, with all that being said, what is the legacy of the 2020 Lakers in their NBA bubble title? I would say that it is legitimate, but different. When you talk about a season like this, people bring up the asterisk, and that's okay. You can have the asterisk around it because it was different. We've never seen anything like it before in NBA history, but the feat that it was, I don't think should be diminished, because they had to navigate an unfamiliar environment. They had to play in an atmosphere that they'd never played in before, and overall, this was a really good team. They deserve their flowers, even if this title came with, of course, some question marks around it. I would consider this title legitimate, but different. And overall, because the NBA bubble was an environment that we've never seen before, the Lakers will always have an asterisk around that title because it was so different, as I stated previously. And so my opinion is very, very far from the end-all be-all. I would say to every individual fan, it's their choice to decide how much those differences mean, how much weight they put in those counter-arguments, as opposed to the arguments themselves, and they can decide for themselves if it takes away or adds to the title's legacy. I would say that it maybe even adds to it. That may have been the purest form of hoops we've ever seen. No fans, no crowd. It's just five guys out there on the court on each team just playing basketball. But I can see the other side too, depending on how integral you see the fans to it and how much you consider the fans a part of basketball, a part of the game, a part of the results. It's always going to be different. I think it's legitimate, but there's so much room for discussion. And this was just a little bit of a trip down memory lane. I wanted to look at the Lakers' run to winning the NBA championship in 2020. It was quite a season. The NBA bubble was such a unique experience, one we'll never see again, but one that's always going to be fun to look back on, even if it's just for how different it was. When the whole world was going crazy, the NBA bubble was there. The NBA said that the show must go on. What a time it was to be a basketball fan. Thank you.